picture like an advanced master level yogi in your mind right now? Just, visualize that for a second.
I'm guessing you're picturing a guy sitting silently in a cave.
Exactly. A guy in some remote mountain cave, draped in a simple cloth, totally detached from all material possessions.
Yeah, the classic image.
Right. What you are probably not picturing is a guy aggressively analyzing a quarterly profit and loss spreadsheet while simultaneously trying to figure out why his teenager is giving him this silent treatment.
No, that definitely doesn't fit the traditional ashram aesthetic.
It doesn't. But the source material we're doing a deep dive into today argues that the boardroom spreadsheet and, that messy family dynamic might actually be the ultimate spiritual tests.
It really shatters that artificial wall we've built, right, between spiritual enlightenment and our modern, loud, demanding reality.
Absolutely. So today's mission is to explore this incredible paradox. Can you reach the pinnacle of spiritual peace and still be a profit-driven corporate executive?
And we're looking at this through the life and philosophy of Osman. He's widely known as the blind Muslim yogi.
Right, and he's not just a meditation teacher or a master-level energy healer. He is, crucially, an entrepreneur.
Which is such a fascinating combination. You can actually find his insights and his services over at yogawellness786.com. He basically presents this paradigm where the boardroom isn't the enemy of yoga.
It's the application of it.
Exactly.
Well, I'm naturally stepping into the shoes of the curious skeptic for this deep dive, because when I read through these sources, I kept hitting a wall with this idea of the spiritual capitalist.
It's a tough concept to wrap your head around at first.
It really is. Because, the assumption most of us operate under is that if you genuinely want to achieve that pinnacle of yoga, you have to pack a bag, renounce your wealth, swear off romantic relationships, and just escape society.
Right. It feels like a zero-sum game. You either get the pristine spiritual peace or you get the messy material success.
You can't have both.
Well, that is kind of the defining tension of the modern human condition, isn't it? But to understand why Osman's approach is so radical, we have to deconstruct why we even think yogis need to live in caves in the first place.
Right, because it's not just an aesthetic choice.
No, not at all. It's tied to the absolute peak of spiritual practice, this state known as samadhi.
Samadhi, which is essentially the ultimate goal of yoga, right? That state of profound, complete absorption and unity.
Exactly. And the sources note that Osman actually achieved this at the remarkably young age of 19.
19. That's wild.
I know. And not just through one lucky break either. He hit this state across 4 or 5 different spiritual pathways.
Wait, what does that actually mean mechanically? Like, how do you hit the same peak through different paths?
Okay, so think of the human brain and spirit as a mountain with different base camps. The pathways Osman used, which traditionally include things like the yoga of intellect, devotion, selfless action, meditative focus, they are really just different methods of aggressively downregulating the brain's default mode network.
And that's the part of your brain responsible for your sense of self, right? Like your anxieties and your ego.
Precisely. So by engaging multiple pathways, Osman essentially cross-trained his consciousness to quiet that network completely.
Okay, so he reaches the summit of this mountain at 19. His ego is completely quieted. And the natural next step, which the sources say he was heavily pressured to take, is to move into a monastery.
Right. He received multiple invitations to dedicate his life full-time to teaching.
To live the classic monk life. But he turned it down.
He did. And his explanation for declining actually clears up this massive misconception we have about monastic life.
How so?
Well, we tend to view monks withdrawing from society as a moral judgment. Like, we think they're consciously shunning the material world because money and society are bad or impure.
Yeah, that's definitely the assumption.
But Osman points out that it's actually a profound psychological and neurological shift. When someone reaches that level of samadhi, they become so bliss-centered, so spiritually intoxicated by that internal state.
But they just lose interest.
They literally lose the cognitive ability to care about the material world.
Wow. So it's not a rejection of society, it's just an absolute loss of interest.
Yeah.
It sounds a lot like hitting a flow state.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
You know, when you're completely absorbed in a project you love or like a masterpiece of a movie, and you literally forget to eat or sleep, the outside world just fades.
Yeah.
It sounds like Osman is describing that flow state, but on a permanent cosmic scale.
That analogy is perfect because it really highlights the loss of external awareness. Like, Osman notes that in this state of supreme bliss, a practitioner loses all societal conditioning.
Even the concept of shame, right?
Yes. He says an advanced yogi in the state would happily walk down a crowded city street completely naked without a second thought.
That is, I mean, that's hard to imagine.
Because the social etiquette of clothing just no longer registers as a reality in their brain.
They just don't perceive the social construct anymore.
Exactly. The only reason they'd put on clothes is to obey the law. Because a true yogi operates with ahimsa, non-harm, and they won't disrupt societal order by breaking laws. But that internal, ego-driven need to conform, it's entirely erased.
I struggle with that, though. I really do.
Why is that?
Because if you have reached a state where you are operating on a plane of pure bliss and the material world is so insignificant that you don't even care about wearing clothes, why on earth would you actively choose to come back to it?
Right.
Why reject the monastery to come back to tax brackets and 9-to-5 corporate stress? Is there just some glitch in the human operating system where we crave the struggle?
Well, Osman's reasoning is that withdrawing from the world simply didn't feel natural to his specific human experience.
Okay.
He has immense respect for the monastic path and the sacrifices monks make, but he recognized that he was given a physical body and a place in a complex society for a reason.
So he made a conscious choice to return to the friction.
Yes, a highly active choice to return to the human experience rather than just float above it.
And he didn't just, like, dip his toe back in. He dove headfirst into the deep end of capitalism.
He really did.
And this is where my skepticism really flares up.
Okay.
Because Osman actively calls himself an entrepreneur. He proudly states he's a capitalist with a, what was the phrase? A healthy appetite for creating profit.
That's the quote.
I have to push back on this. Isn't the inherent goal of capitalism to accumulate personal wealth? How does he reconcile the core yogic principle of non-attachment with wanting a higher profit margin?
It requires a complete paradigm shift in how you view the mechanics of business.
Okay, lay it on me.
If you view business merely as hoarding resources for personal gain, then yeah, obviously it contradicts yoga. But Osman doesn't see it that way. He views entrepreneurship as an ecosystem of energy.
An ecosystem.
Right. He sees entrepreneurs as the literal lifeblood of the economy. They aren't hoarders, they are circulators.
Okay, I can actually see that. If we look at this through the lens of thermodynamics,
Oh, interesting.
a monastery is essentially a closed system, right? The goal is to perfectly preserve internal spiritual energy, insulating it from the outside world.
Yes, exactly.
But Osman is choosing to operate as an open system. He's taking his energy, pushing it into the chaotic market, and letting it interact with other forces.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. Because an open system requires constant flow and transformation. Osman argues that entrepreneurs are the innovators who step in when circumstances are incredibly adverse.
Like failing businesses.
Yeah, businesses drowning in what he calls deep waters or red waters. Enterprises that are just hemorrhaging resources. The entrepreneur uses their energy and focus to pull that business out, restructure it, and make it prosperous again.
So the profit margin isn't the end goal at all. It's just the metric that proves the system is healthy and flowing.
Exactly. And look at the downstream effects of that healthy system. By generating profit, these businesses create vital jobs.
Right, they pay salaries.
They provide reliable incomes that allow families to survive, buy food, and thrive. And furthermore, they generate the taxation that supports the entire infrastructure of the country.
Oh, wow. So roads, schools, hospitals.
They're all funded by the economic engine that entrepreneurs keep running.
Which means making money, managing international client bases, driving a company toward a profitable quarter. None of that is inherently unspiritual.
Not if you're approaching business as an ecosystem of creation. If your success literally feeds families and builds infrastructure, then capitalism can absolutely be navigated with a yogic mindset.
It's just another form of karma yoga, the yoga of action.
And for anyone listening right now who feels torn between their career ambitions and their desire for inner peace, I think this is incredibly validating.
Oh, 100%.
Your drive to build something successful in the corporate world is not at odds with your spiritual growth. The boardroom is really just a different type of ashram.
That's powerful. And, if his approach to capitalism is about generating and circulating financial energy, his approach to relationships is remarkably similar.
Very much so.
It's entirely about how you manage your internal biological energy, which leads us to probably the most physically demanding aspect of the human experience: romantic relationships and sexual energy.
Which is arguably the most debated topic in spiritual circles.
Definitely. Now, Osman is very critical of what he calls extremist schools of yoga science. Right?
Yeah. These are the traditions that mandate complete withdrawal from the opposite sex from a very young age, and they forbid sexual activity entirely.
The sources explicitly mention that these extremist schools view sex as a heinous waste of life force energy.
Right, a heinous waste.
Because the prevailing theory there is that you have this incredibly potent internal battery, and if you use it on physical intimacy, you are physically draining your spiritual power.
That's the traditional extremist view, yes.
So if sexual energy drains the battery, how does Osman justify engaging in it while still maintaining his advanced state?
Because Osman understands the mechanics of transmutation.
Transmutation.
Right. The extremist approach is essentially suppression. You lock the energy away because you're terrified it's going to overpower you.
Okay.
But Osman, because of his advanced meditative state, isn't overpowered by his biology. He clearly states, of course I'm human, I feel desire.
But he refuses to become a slave to lust.
Exactly. He experiences the biological drive, but he dictates how and where that energy is directed.
It's the difference between letting a fire burn down your house versus capturing that heat to power a steam engine.
I love that.
You don't put the fire out entirely, which is what the extremist schools suggest, but you also don't just let it burn out of control. You respect the raw power of that biological drive, and you channel it with intention.
And the way he channels it is through civilized, refined fulfillment.
So no animalistic promiscuity.
Right, he completely rejects that. Promiscuity scatters energy wildly and creates all this emotional chaos. Instead, he finds healthy fulfillment in monogamous relationships, specifically within the framework of marriage.
Which perfectly mirrors the fundamental goal of yoga itself, if you think about it.
Balance.
Exactly, balance.
Yeah.
If you look at the physiological goals of a deep yoga practice, it's about balancing the left and right hemispheres of the brain. It's about balancing the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems.
Harmonizing the internal feminine and masculine energies.
Right.
And Osman takes that internal neurological principle and applies it directly to his external life. He notes that, as a male, he actively seeks out a feminine counterpart.
He finds that having a committed feminine presence enriches his life.
Yeah, it adds a dimension of emotional and energetic resonance that is just inherently lacking in an isolated male personality.
So the external monogamous relationship is literally the physical manifestation of the internal balance he cultivates on the meditation cushion.
It's all connected.
Okay, we have covered some incredibly high-level philosophy here. We've deconstructed the neurobiology of samadhi, framed capitalism as an open thermodynamic system, analyzed the transmutation of biological energy.
We've covered a lot of ground.
But, theory is easy. What does this actually look like on a random Tuesday morning? Like, what is Osman's actual grounded reality?
Well, it is entirely devoid of the serene, magical cloud we usually associate with spiritual masters.
So no floating above the clouds.
No, his reality is incredibly demanding.
Demanding feels like an understatement from what I read. I mean, Osman is a master-level energy healer who has reached the peaks of samadhi. But he was also a father of 4.
Yes.
He has ex-wives. He navigates the fallout of relationship breakdowns. He carries the heavy, crushing burden of international corporate executive stress.
And let's not forget, he even battles serious health challenges and the agonizing process of physical recovery.
It's just nonstop.
He deals with the exact same friction that every single person listening to this deals with. I mean, he talks about the reality of having rebellious kids who sometimes just don't want to talk to him.
I love that detail so much. It just does not get more humbling or real world than a teenager giving you the silent treatment.
It really doesn't.
It doesn't matter if you can downregulate your default mode network on command.
Right.
A moody teenager is still going to test your patience.
Oh, absolutely. But that friction is the ultimate proof of his philosophy. The reality of his life is messy and complex. But here is the crucial distinction.
What's that?
He does not use his advanced spiritual practice to escape that mess. He uses it to survive it.
Yes. Yoga isn't his escape pod. It's his cognitive multi-tool.
A multi-tool, exactly.
Like when a high-stakes international business deal is falling apart and he's swimming in those red waters, his meditation practice isn't about closing his eyes and pretending the stress doesn't exist.
No, it's about practically intercepting the cortisol spike. He uses these ancient sciences to keep his prefrontal cortex online.
So when his nervous system wants to panic over a financial crisis, or maybe a breakdown in a family relationship,
His yogic training allows him to observe the emotion without being hijacked by it. He explicitly states that meditation is the exact tool he uses to manage his ex-wives, his kids, his money, and his health.
It just gives him the cognitive distance required to make rational, compassionate decisions in the middle of all that chaos.
Which brings us directly back to you, the listener.
Right, because the ultimate takeaway from Osman's life is that integration is the goal, not escape.
You do not need to quit your high-pressure job.
You don't need to abandon your ambitious financial goals.
And you certainly don't need to flee your incredibly complex family dynamics to be a spiritually grounded person.
The challenges you face every day, the friction with a difficult client, the stress of managing a household budget, the emotional labor of a marriage.
These are not obstacles preventing you from spiritual growth. According to this framework, these are the exact weights in the gym that you are supposed to be lifting.
This is where the practice happens.
And if you're intrigued by how these ancient tools can be applied to your highly modern problems, you can dive much deeper into Osman's work.
Yeah, he actively applies these yoga sciences to current trending topics, which is great. You can explore his perspectives, check out his list of services, and find ways to contact him directly at yogawellness786.com.
And he always ends his communications with a very simple, grounded sign-off, which is always take care of yourself.
Which, in the context of everything we've discussed today, is actually a really profound instruction.
It really is. Taking care of yourself means embracing the absolute totality of your human experience, the spiritual bliss and the material spreadsheets, without feeling the need to amputate one part of your life just to save the other.
So as we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a completely different angle to chew on.
Okay, let's hear it.
We spent this time establishing that pulling back from society isn't the only path to enlightenment, right?
Yeah.
And that you can be a master yogi while participating in capitalism.
Right.
But it leaves us with a fascinating, almost uncomfortable question.
Ooh, I like those.
Osman noted that at the absolute peak of spiritual bliss, an advanced practitioner loses all societal shame to the point where social etiquette and the need to wear clothes completely vanish from their reality.
Yeah, the naked in the street analogy.
Right. So if reaching perfect spiritual enlightenment literally erases our ability to perceive societal rules, is our modern polite civilization actually built on a foundation of collective spiritual disconnect?
Wow.
Do we desperately need a little bit of internal ego-driven chaos just to keep the whole machine running?